Racing isn't all about shiny trophies and champagne celebrations. Behind every roar of an engine, there are stories that can bring tears to your eyes. Some racers never got to lift their trophies, while others lost everything chasing their dreams. These stories aren't just about those who finished first, they're about real people who put everything on the line for the sport they loved. Today, we'll look at some moments in racing that broke hearts around the world. These aren't just sad stories, they're reminders of how racing can unite people in both joy and sadness. Get ready to discover some of the most emotional moments that changed racing forever. Felipe Massa, the driver who just couldn't catch a break.
The thing is, I would say maybe most of the experience you learn is from karting. Then you get better.
If there was ever a driver who seemed to have the worst luck in racing, it would be Felipe Massa. This Brazilian driver has gone through more heartbreak than most racers experience in their entire careers. Just imagine getting so close to your dreams, only to watch them slip away time after time. That's been Massa's story throughout his racing life. But the most emotional chapter of his story came in September 2016. After racing in Formula 1 for many years, Massa announced he would retire at the end of the season. Now, here's where things get really special. His last race was going to be at his home track in Brazil. It seemed like the perfect way to end his career, racing in front of his own people one last time. The race day came and it was typical Brazilian weather, wet and rainy. But Massa didn't let that stop him. He was driving amazingly well, fighting for position and showing everyone he still had what it takes. The crowd was going wild every time he passed by. You could feel the energy in the air. Everyone wanted their home hero to have one last great race. But then, as if the racing gods weren't done testing Massa, disaster struck. The rain got worse and worse. Cars were sliding off the track left and right. Nobody could control their cars properly anymore. And then, in a moment that broke hearts across Brazil, Massa lost control. His car spun out, ending his final home race in the worst possible way. What happened next shows why racing is more than just a sport. As Massa walked back to the pits, wearing his Brazilian flag like a cape, something amazing happened. Every single team, not just his own, but all of them came out to the pit lane. They formed a line, clapping and cheering for him. Mechanics, engineers, even rival team members, all showing respect for a driver who never gave up, no matter how many times bad luck knocked him down. Jochen Rindt, the champion who never got to celebrate. Next up is probably the saddest story in all of racing. Jochen Rindt, the only driver to become world champion after he died. This isn't just any racing story, it's a reminder of how dangerous the sport used to be. Rindt wasn't your typical racing driver, he had to work incredibly hard to get into Formula 1. And when he finally made it in 1969, he showed everyone just how talented he was. Imagine being so good that you're faster than Graham Hill, one of the greatest drivers of that time. That's exactly what Rindt did. By 1970, Rindt was absolutely flying. He won 5 races out of the first 8. That's like winning more than half the races he entered, and he was leading the championship by a huge margin. And it looked like nothing could stop him from becoming world champion. But then, tragedy struck close to home. 2 of his closest friends in racing, Piers Courage and Bruce McLaren, died in racing accidents. This hit Rindt hard. He had a young daughter at home, and these losses made him think seriously about quitting racing together. Sadly, he decided to continue. Then came that terrible day at Monza during practice for the Italian Grand Prix. Rindt took his Lotus race car out for practice, but he never came back. His car hit the guardrail at the famous Parabolica corner at incredibly high speed. The crash was so severe that Rindt didn't survive. Here's the most incredible part. Rindt had built such a big lead in the championship that no other driver could catch up to his points total in the remaining races, so months after his death, Jochen Rindt was declared Formula 1 world champion. His wife Nina collected the trophy at the end of the year, and it remains one of the most bittersweet moments in racing history. Esteban Ocon, from living in a caravan to victory lane. Sometimes the most emotional stories in racing aren't about tragedy. They're about triumph against impossible odds. That's exactly what Esteban Ocon's story is all about. Unlike many Formula 1 drivers who come from wealthy families, Ocon's family was so poor they had to sell their house just to keep his racing dream alive. Imagine living in a tiny caravan, that's like a small trailer, and that too for years, traveling from race to race, just hoping that one day all the sacrifice would be worth it. That was Ocon's life. His parents gave up everything they had because they believed in their son's dream. When Ocon finally made it to Formula One with Force India, it seemed like all that sacrifice has paid off. He was doing great, showing real talent on the track, but Formula One can be cruel. When Force India was sold, Ocon lost his seat. It didn't matter how good he was, the new team owner had other plans. Most people would have given up at this point, but not Ocon. He took a job at Mercedes as reserve driver, basically a backup driver who doesn't get to race. He spent a whole year watching from the sidelines, but he never lost hope. Finally, he got another chance with Renault, which later became Alpine, and the team wasn't one of the fastest, so nobody expected much. But then came the 2021 Hungarian Grand Prix, and everything changed. Through a crazy series of events, Ocon found himself leading the race. But this wasn't going to be an easy win. He had Sebastian Vettel, a 4-time world champion, right behind him. And if that wasn't enough, Lewis Hamilton, possibly the greatest driver ever, was charging through the field like a man possessed. Hamilton had fallen to 14th place but fought his way up to 5th, and with 20 laps to go, it seemed like he would catch up and pass Ocon easily. But then something magical happened. Ocon's teammate Fernando Alonso put on one of the greatest defensive driving displays ever seen. He held Hamilton back for more than 10 crucial laps, giving Ocon the breathing room he needed. When Ocon crossed the finish line to win his first Formula One race, it wasn't just a victory, it was a victory for every kid who ever dreamed big while living small. It was a win for his family, who had sacrificed everything, for every night spent in that tiny caravan, for every person who ever believed that dreams can come true if you work hard enough. Ayrton Senna, the day racing stood still. The most heartbreaking moment in racing history happened on May 1st, 1994 at the San Marino Grand Prix. But to understand why this day hit so hard, you need to know what happened just the day before. On Saturday, during qualifying, Ronald Ratzenberger, a new driver who had only raced in Formula One 3 times, crashed his car at an unbelievable speed of 195.7 miles per hour. The crash was so severe that Ratzenberger didn't survive. This shook everyone in the paddock, and especially Ayrton Senna. Senna, who was already a 3-time world champion, was deeply affected by Ratzenberger's death. In fact, they found an Austrian flag in Senna's car after his own crash. He had been planning to wave it after the race to honor Ratzenberger. That's the kind of person Senna was. Speaking of who Senna was, he wasn't just any racing driver. Back in 1992, during practice at Spa, another driver named Eric Kamos had a terrible crash. While other cars drove past, Senna stopped his car right there on the track, got out, and ran to help Kamos. He literally risked his own life to help another driver, and that's why people loved him so much. The next day, Sunday, started like any other race day. Senna was leading with Michael Schumacher following behind, and then without warning, Senna's car went straight off at the Tamburello corner. The speed was astronomical, 192 miles per hour, when it hit the concrete barrier. The world watched in horror as the race was stopped with red flags and medical teams rushed to help. Sadly, Senna's injuries were too severe, and the news of his death sent shockwaves around the world. In Brazil, his home country, the government declared 3 days of national mourning. Think about that. An entire country essentially stopped for 3 days because they lost their hero. The impact of Senna's death was felt for years to come. In 2000, when Michael Schumacher equaled Senna's record for race wins, something extraordinary happened. Schumacher, known for being tough and unemotional, broke down crying during the press conference. When asked why, he explained that reaching Senna's number of wins made him realize just how much Senna had achieved and what the sport had lost. But Senna wasn't just about racing, he quietly gave millions of dollars to help poor children in Brazil. He wasn't just a champion on the track, he was a champion for people who needed help. And that's why even today, almost 30 years later, people still get emotional talking about Ayrton Senna. These stories remind us that racing is more than lap times and championship points. It's about real people putting everything on the line for what they love. Some stories end in tears of joy, like Ocon's unlikely victory. Others end in tears of sadness, like Senna's tragic departure. but all of them show us what makes racing special. Not just the speed and excitement, but the human stories of triumph and tragedy that make us feel connected to these brave men and women who risk it all for the sport they love. If you like this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button to join our community of passionate motorsport fans. Let me know in the comments which racing story touched you the most, and share any other emotional moments from racing history that you think deserve to be remembered.